Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safe House, brought to you by the SafeHouse Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the SafeHouse Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. Welcome back to the special edition series of the Safe House, based upon the book by Roger Grimes, Data-Driven Computer Defense. Last episode, if you remember, Roger took us on a whirlwind tour of root causes and the criticality of understanding those. Today's episode, he will walk us through the arena of mental maps and operational frameworks. Welcome back, Roger.
Glad to be here.
Take us on a tour of mental maps and operational frameworks, please.
Yeah, so just to re-emphasize real quick, the biggest thing cybersecurity defenders need to do is look at the initial root causes of the way that you could be successfully hacked. The root causes, not the outcomes of root causes. Ransomware is not your problem. It's how the ransomware got into your environment. Was it social engineering? Was it unpatched software? Was it a password guessing? Was it password crack attack or whatever? So you need to figure out what are the most common ways that you could be compromised, figure out the relative risk. And let me say, for most companies, almost one, not all, but most, it's social engineering is involved in about 70 to 90% of attacks. Unpatched software or firmware is involved in about 33% of attacks. Authentication attacks are involved in about these days, about 30% of attacks, but 79% of the authentication attacks are due to social engineering. So it kind of feeds back. So you really end up with two major problems: social engineering, unpatched software or firmware, and then some type of authentication attack. But I say you need to make a mental, even when when I tell people, okay, you've got these three big causes, you're going to be besieged by everyone else in the world, and maybe your own mind, into concentrating on other things. And it's because you're being asked to fix everything all at once, and you have compliance guidelines, and you have to implement this, and you have to implement that. And what you need to ask yourself is create this mental mind map of, okay, how is my company most likely to be compromised? Again, social engineering, unpatched software, that sort of stuff. And let me say, it may change over time. So the mental mind map is, let's say that one day the social engineering and patching isn't the number one cause. Maybe one day it's cloud viruses, right? Or maybe one day it's some type of, data malformation attack, or it's some side channel attack. Let's say that it changes. And let me say, I expect things, some things do change. Like when I got back when I was in computer security in 1987, DOS and Apple boot viruses were a big deal. And they were a big deal for a lot of years until the floppy disk drive finally. So my number one advice should be, make sure to open your floppy disk drive when you reboot your computer, so you don't get infected. And then, then USB keys in the days of Configure back in 2000, that was a big deal. And, and I had to say, hey, make sure you turn off auto runs. So you do get these runs and these trends over time that were small and grow larger. And so you have to create a mental mind map of, okay, Rogers told me social engineering and unpatched software are my two biggest problems, and credential stuff. Those would be the top three. It could be something else one day, and I have to create a mental mind map, so I'm open to that something else takes over. Or maybe I do such a good job at fighting social engineering in my environment, it just isn't the issue. Or maybe I work in a top secret government laboratory that they don't connect to the internet, and you're on these top secret computers. And so social engineering is not, your computers aren't connecting to the internet, and you're not being allowed to browse the internet in some broad way. So it's just not your company's problem. So you create this mental mind map of like, okay, I've got to go through the 13 root causes that I talked about last time, figure out which ones really apply to me. And then I want to always be aware that it could change over time. Like, again, maybe a really great chance. I was writing my first malware book, first computer security book, in 1999. It came out in 2000, 2001, called Malicious Mobile Code, Virus Protection for Windows. I wrote it for O'Reilly. And I had a guy that was my tech editor, and he was telling me about USB viruses. He was in Puerto Rico or Guatemala or something. I said, we're not seeing that here. That's a nutty thing. I don't need to bring it up. Well, within 6 months, it had taken over the planet, and Configure came out and, started taking over the planet. And I thought I really didn't see the trend coming. So now with a data-driven defense, I'm like, I need to create data that helps me see the trends. Like, maybe today, a good example for today would be AI deepfakes, although that's really mostly around social engineering. But in the past, maybe it was social media I was hearing about. And then before that, it's maybe I was hearing about cloud or something. Maybe before that, I was hearing about chatting apps or something. But you're going to come across in your career these different channels of attacks. No matter what the channel is, it's the same 13 attacks. It's just social engineering over messaging or Slack or Microsoft Teams versus email. But you're going to be coming across all these things. You have to think to yourself, do I have a mental mind map? Do I have data in place that I can tell that things are changing? And what I mean by that, as a really good, easy example, is in most companies, you can get a list of your top detected malware. And usually many times that malware is detected as it's almost being downloaded, but it's intercepted before it really gets to the machine. Some of it maybe lives on the machine dwells for a couple of days before it gets detected, or forever. But every company, every person, if they go to their antivirus, they're going to find a list of malware that is detected and removed. Literally with 30 minutes of research, you can find out how that malware spreads. Like you don't even have to guess, like this malware program spreads through social engineering, through Microsoft Office documents. This malware program spreads through unpatched this or that. Even ransomware, different like Phobos ransomware I've been talking about a lot personally lately, that spreads through social engineering, unpatched software, or password guessing attacks against RDP. So you can, with just a little bit of researching, figure out we're seeing these threats try to come into our environment, and very quickly kind of figure out a risk reward type thing. You're like, oh, it looks like a lot of this comes through social engineering. Some of it comes through unpatched software. Some of it could do credential. So with literally a little bit of testing, a little bit of looking, a little bit of research, you can kind of figure out what your relative risks are.
So the foundation, the tie down, are the 13 potential the root causes. Basically, that's the foundation, is what I'm seeing in my head. And over that is this malleable type of membrane that you can test. Okay, is this new? This is new. This is new. Does it impact me? Where would it impact me? What's the risk of it happening to me? Is that sort of how that looks? It's kind of like a brain, almost kind of like a brainish kind of concept.
Yeah. I mean, and even the simplest brain, right? Because
well, hey! I thought we were friends.
No, I mean, like like the threats can sound really intimidating. AI and deepfake. Let me make up a new one. Cloud virus, right? There's this cloud virus that spreads through and can impact all the tenants at once. Oh my God! There's going to be an answer for it. The cloud virus is not an initial root cause. It's an outcome of how they got on the machine. How did they get on the machine? How did they steal the car? How did they break into my house? I mean, you as a secondary victim could say, well, it happened because of blah, blah. And let me say, I've got it in the model, third-party reliance issue, supply chain of attack. I didn't do anything. They got hacked. And then supply chain reliance, I got hacked. Yep. So it's in the model. So, but you're going to hear lots of threats that come up. USB key viruses, maybe boot, I laugh, boot virus, cloud boot virus. We're all going to have these cloud booting, operating systems soon, right? In the cloud or something. It's going to be some weird nebula. And you're going to be kind of like, oh my God, like deep fakes. Oh my God. Deepfakes is almost all social engineering, but AI can take all of the 13 attacks and somehow make them worse, maybe except for maybe physical attack. Although I guess with AI, you could say, where am I likely to find unmonitored laptops and, USB keys? And it could tell you, go to the mall food court.
This is your boss. Ship me your laptop. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not, so you'll hear these new technology like AI. Well, that's great. That's AI. How does it attack me? It's a tool that's used to do one of the root engineering methods. So, and let me say how it changes. I've been doing it for so long now, since I wrote the first version of DDD, which probably been 10, 15 years ago when it was a white paper at Microsoft. The way that it changes my mindset is that every time someone comes to me and tells me to do something, the very first thing I'm thinking is, does it make sense based upon the threat model for me to concentrate on this subject? And let me give you an example. When I was at Microsoft, they wanted me to push out 100 different Active Directory controls. I forget the name of it, but there used to be this Microsoft template that we told everybody, you need to apply this, and it had all the right group policy settings in it. I forget what it was, but it was this default Microsoft default security baseline or something like that. But it was this group policies that you should apply to all your servers and all your workstations. And Microsoft was telling everybody to do it, but they really weren't applying it to their stuff. Yeah. And so Microsoft came to me and said, Roger, we really want to apply these 200 controls. It was like 200 or 300 group policies. But we're going to start with 10, and we want you to pick the 10 out of that whole list that we can deploy. I'm not making this up. You're going to laugh because it's so real world. We want you to pick 10 that will not cause any problems so that we can show them we can push 10 and not crush all their machines and cause operational issues. And then they'll trust us and let us push the other 100 and 290. You know, we want to gain their faith. And so we want you to choose 10 that are really reasonable to push, like maybe we're disabling LM hashes or something that will cause the least amount of operational disruption that will gain trust. And so I looked at the list of these 300 controls and I like, do any of them stop social engineering? No. Do any of them have to do with patching? One. But it wasn't really even the way that people were being exploited at the time was Java, was unpatched Java. Yeah. You know, and I was like, even the group policy that says turn on Windows Update isn't solving the 92% of the problem. So I went back to him and I said, listen, it's worthless to install these controls. It's a fantasy, and I don't want to install any of them. Yeah. And they're like, oh, no. And I literally stood my ground, and I was getting yelled at and people were going to fire me and everything. And but eventually when they heard my reasoning, they came to support me. And what did we do? We started trying to fight social engineering and phishing and getting MFA and that sort of stuff. But, you know, it rears its head another time someone came to me and said, I want you to create 5 security videos. Roger, you're a good teacher. You always teach people. Let's create these 5 videos and push them out. And I looked at the subjects and they were like cloud threats, you know, maybe today would be AI deep fake threats and all this stuff. And I looked, and none of the 5 things were, hey, you need to patch your software and fight social engineering. I went, I don't want to do any of these 5. So the mindset that I started to get was I wanted to push back on and doing stuff that didn't work. Like if someone's telling me to push 300 controls, my mindset is now, okay, which of these controls are going to have the most impact upon my threat model? Yep. You know, so I've got to create a threat model. I've got a threat model. I get my answer, and then I should concentrate on the things that help me put down the biggest threats first. And it literally, you know, when I see anything, SANS, you know, top 10 controls, which is now the Center for Internet Security's top 20 across web and programming and all this stuff. But I don't look, when I see 20 controls, the first thing I'm doing, because I have a data-driven mindset, is I'm starting to look at that list and go, which ones matter the most? Because and I do it in everything. Roger, I want you to turn on auditing. Which one matters the most? And, you know, like someone's like, Roger, I want you to go install firewalls. I'm like, literally the U.S. government and everybody else says we should be installing zero trust because firewalls don't work. You know, or antivirus. What antivirus should we install? It doesn't really matter because it's not really helping. Yeah. You know, so I changed it's literally the reason I went from working at Microsoft to KnowBe4. I went, the number one problem is social engineering. And you know who's addressing that the best? KnowBe4. That's why I went to work for them. It's fun. I talk about social engineering all the time. People go, well, you work for KnowBe4. Nope, it's the other way around. I was at Microsoft installing smart cards and advanced intrusion detection and PKI. Like I was a big PKI guy, still love PKI. But every customer that I installed that stuff on, they're still being compromised because of social engineering and unpatched software. And so I knew that I was going to go work for a firm. I got depressed. Last year or two of my life at Microsoft, I started getting depressed. I'd literally come home and sit in my chair and start to get depressed because I realized everything I'm being asked to do has nothing to do with the 2 problems, social engineering and unpatched software. Yeah. So that's what I would say the mind map that you have to do is, again, threat model your environment, figure out what out of the 13 ways of initial root hacking ways, which ones are most likely to attack me, and then start concentrating on this first. And then every time someone says, I need you to go do something, I mean, sometimes you just have to do it because you have to do it, right?
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. You don't get a choice. They say go do it, but I started to push back, and like I say, and it got into everything I started to do. If they told me to go do group policies, I started to think that way. If they told me to do auditing, I started to think about that. I started to say, is it really going to provide that much value? Or let me give you another example, because this is a really, really common example that almost every organization does. And when I say it, it's going to seem silly, but most companies have some sort of newsletter. They put security newsletter, cybersecurity newsletter they put out. And the first issue, they're always talking about fighting social engineering because it's a big deal. Well, the next month they decide that, I covered social engineering this time, so this month I'm going to cover something else. Maybe they pick patching, or maybe they pick eavesdropping. They start to put in stories about, hey, there's this weird AI deep fake attack that hit this bank and stole $20 million. And there was this digital certificate attack that happened to an Iranian bank. And these security newsletters become news rags where they're sharing these really interesting and unusual attacks. But do they apply to the company that the newsletter's going out to? No. And it comes like they'll say, well, Roger, I put out a monthly newsletter and we covered security. We covered fighting social engineering last month. So this month we're going to cover something else. So next month we're covering, and we're going to come back to social engineering at least 2 or 3 times a year. If it's your number one problem, if it's 70 to 90% of your risk, shouldn't fighting
every
social
month.
Engineering every month until it's no longer your problem?
Yeah.
You're like, hey, I want you to write about this digital certificate attack in an Iranian bank. My brain's going, would this ever work at this company? No. Has it been used against? I'll give you another example. People will, let's say, fail an audit because you're using TLS version 1.1 and you should be using TLS version 1.3. That's a common audit failure that I'll see people get. My mindset is that how people are successfully attacked? Am I at risk? Is my company at risk because they have websites enabled at TLS level, 1.1 versus 1.3? You will not pass many audits if you don't fix that problem. It has zero impact upon your risk. I don't want to fix it because it's not in. Can you name a single attack ever where the guy went, if a single ransomware attack, it really came down that we didn't have the right TLS applied. It really should have been version 2.3 because that has perfect forward secrecy. And the attackers just they attacked our keys. No, it doesn't. And it's insane, the stuff that we're asked to focus on. And I'm bringing this one up because I remember there was somebody that was that said they weren't going to use our company before because we had TLS level 1. I think it was 1.2, but they had some website that we had that had 1.2. And I'm like, and they were like, we're not going to go with your product because you fell our compliance. You have this problem. We can't go with you. We can't choose you as a vendor.
Yeah.
A data-driven mindset is like, does it have impact on risk? Yeah. People are like, yes. It doesn't. It's never been in the recorded history. I've never had anyone tell me that's what took our company down. Or let me give you another one. It was what was the big CPU exploits a couple of years ago? It was the Meltdown Inspector. So a couple of years ago, Meltdown Inspector came out, and these are the CPU exploits that impacted all operating systems, any general CPU made since 1999. And literally, its rating was a 10, a 9.8 or a 10 on the CVSS scale. Oh my God, we got to go patch it and everything. And I remember when that was going off, and I was actually giving a data-driven defense talk to a large law firm in New Orleans. They had 1,000 lawyers, and I remember telling them, I don't think you need to patch this yet. And they're like, why? I said, there's not been a single case of someone using it yet. It had been announced, you have to patch it. There's even, they had test exploits when they announced Meltdown Inspector, their website, and they even had some people had made some viruses and some worms that you could test. But I was like, it's not been used once. And let me say, so I told the guy, I said, I'm not really sure you need to get on Meltdown Inspector just yet. And I remember I actually, for one of the few times in my life, got kind of fired. The guy wasn't paying me yet. I was just giving a talk. But he walked me out and he said, listen, I'm the CISO and I'm trying to talk my whole company and board of directors into doing this big Meltdown Inspector and, patch fix. and you're telling him we don't need to do it. Well, he got his approval, and the next day brought down all of his machines. It blue screened all the Windows machines,
no.
and the Linux machines that didn't blue screen ran 50% slower. And Microsoft and Intel and everybody was pointing fingers at each other. They just didn't have the patches figured out. But here it is, like 5 or 7 years later, and there's still to this day not been a single real world exploit. The data-driven mindset, every time you're approached and told, I need to worry about this thing. And by the way, let me say that the CVS scores now are much better. The way that they now, if you get an attack, they're actually looking at that it's actually being exploited and that sort of stuff. So like when Log4j is considered one of the bigger exploits, and it was actually actively being exploited before it was even announced. But so you can rely upon the scores, but at least more. But ask yourself, is it something I need to really be worried about? And if it's not been exploited in real life, probably not. Yeah. And there's all these other things, like if I'm going to be worried about fixing, everybody, I need you to go around to all of our websites. I need you to check our SSL certificates and make sure that we have SSL 1.2 and 1.1 and 1.0 disabled. Needs to be TLS level 1.3. I mean, you can do it just because you're required and this person's not buying your product, but it's not increasing your security. And everybody that's focusing on fixing the TLS level 1.2 problem is not fixing the two problems of how you're likely to be compromised. So a data-driven mindset is focusing on the right things, right aligning your risk with everything that you're told to do. Every time you get an assignment, ask yourself, is this the right thing that's best reducing risk in myself or my organization? And if you have some ability to input, cybersecurity is all about risk management. It's not eliminating risk. You can't eliminate all. You don't live in the world where it would be impossible to do these things. Like people like, I'd like to get rid of all social engineering. That's going to be a hell of a weird world where it's so locked down.
If you get rid of people, you'd probably get rid of it. Yeah.
AI in the AI Terminator world, they'd probably be social engineering each other.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But, so I just think we need to figure out what are the bubbles in the glass of champagne that we really need to concentrate on. And I can tell you, it's really, really tough to focus on the right things because you're going to have so much distraction around you where people are telling you to concentrate on things that don't really matter as much.
So getting to the data-driven component, getting better data, getting the right data, fitting into the mind map, basing it upon the root causes as a foundational aspect, allows us to start to really have a much better mental map and a framework which we can work within by improving our data and maybe asking all the right questions. Is that sort of a combination effect in there?
Yeah, I'm trying to give you the red pill to look at risk management.
Talked about the red pill. I forgot to bring that up earlier.
So that's in the movie Matrix, fantastic movie, by the brothers. And, Neo is being told, he's shown that he lives in this world where really humans are just this organic feeding mass for this larger, would it be an AI or something, computer system? And he's being told, hey, the world's a lot stranger. We need to fight these things. And if you want to stay awake, take the red pill, but if you take the blue pill, you can go back to thinking you're an office worker, in this virtual environment. So he takes the red pill and it's the whole movie. But like literally, it's kind of weird. You know what a data-driven mind map is? I'm going to look at the way that I'm most likely to be attacked in the near future, and I'm going to respond to the most likely threats first. I mean, it really, the mental mind map is the most simple thing you could say. Literally, it's risk management.
Yeah.
But the problem is we're all, a third of, there's 29,000 vulnerabilities announced last year. A third of them were ranked with the highest criticality, telling you you need to patch right away. Decades of data shows us that only 2.7% of announced vulnerabilities are ever used by a single attacker against a real world target ever. And you're like, well, which ones are that? CISA has a list, the Unexploited Vulnerability Catalog. The great CISA organization has a service you can subscribe to and find out which are the ones you need to patch. And if you look, there's a whole lot of stuff you don't really need to worry about patching, at least not as your first and best thing. Like Meltdown Inspector, it's a big deal. You got to patch it, but does it need to be done this week? Or maybe let people go through, find out what is exploding about the patch before you go out and become an early adopter.
Yeah.
So that's what a data-driven defense is, waking up to go, we're doing risk management wrong. And there's better ways to do it.
Yeah. Interesting. Any final kind of thoughts on part 2 of your book? Any other recommendations or thoughts before we move on to our final phase of this?
Yeah, I would say probably the last thing is, a lot of people say, well, Roger, you say data-driven defense, I don't have any data, right? What do I do? Well, you actually many times do have your data, and you're just not picking it up, or you're not realizing you have the right data. Sometimes you have to buy new stuff. But, ask yourself, how can these threats break in? So let me say that I identify social engineering and unpatched software as my biggest threats, and maybe credential theft. How would you detect? You need to think, how would I detect the threats that come through that, right? Can I detect social engineering? Maybe I can't detect the social engineering. I can, maybe through gateways and content filtering and blah, blah, blah. But then what's it going to do? What's going to drop off some malware program? Well, how would I detect I got a malware program, And you start to say, do I have the monitoring tools that would give me detection? I want prevention first. Do I have the things I need to do to prevent social engineering, unpatched software, and credential attacks? Do I have the detection inside that would detect if these attacks were successful despite my best preventative efforts? And do I have good incident response recovery from those sort of things? And then you map your existing systems. I see it as a matrix or a spreadsheet where you're like, okay, here's all the things I need to look for to prevent, detect, and recover. What tools and systems do I have that will prevent, detect, and recover against these threats? Where do I have gaps? Gap analysis. And what you're going to find usually when I do it for companies is that they have a lot of overlap on systems. Like they've got 10 content filters, and 10 firewalls or something, but they don't have anything to detect a scripting attack, let's say. A really common way that the social engineering comes through is through this scripting program they drop off that starts enumerating Active Directory. If you look, a lot of the attacks that come through social engineering for ransomware, they're living off the land attacks. They drop off a stager program, and you're like, and the stager program is never recognized by antivirus. You're like, well, how would I detect that? Well, you could use one of the things I recommend to people, application control. Like all enterprise Windows systems come with App Locker. Turn it on in audit only mode, and you snapshot the system. And that shows this is the system in a known clean state. And only then, from then on, it will only put as a negative event any brand new executable or script that is not in the snapshot. That becomes an event. Well, query your event logs for the App Locker new executable. And anytime you get that, investigate and go, is that a new executable that I want to allow in my environment? So literally every Windows enterprise system has App Locker. Turn it on in audit only mode so it doesn't block anything, because that could cause operational issues. But literally start looking for the event that says, oh, new executable, new script arrived, got launched. And then go, hey, that's a strange name on Roger's system. Maybe we should go investigate that and see what it is. So there are things and ways, if you identify the gaps, and you can also say, maybe I don't need to buy another content filter. I've got 5 of them, maybe, and I have the gap here. Maybe I need to spend money here. So I'd say gap analysis about how you prevent, detect, and respond to the threats that you found to be the most likely issues.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. I'll tell you, this has been most enlightening, my friend. Well, let's wrap this up for today, and then we'll start our next episode in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the SafeHouse Initiative. Thanks for joining us, and remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information on the SafeHouse Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen. Send us an email at safehouseinitiative.org@gmail.com, or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.